10 years ago, I made a documentary about E3. Yes, that E3. The big E3. Back when it was still big. Not in its prime, but still pretty big. The documentary was a flop. We got rejected from every film festival we applied to, like Sundance. Yes, we submitted an early cut to Sundance, but even the local festivals weren't interested. We made probably $50 after spending thousands of dollars producing it, and you've definitely never heard of it. Until now. But why? Why didn't Infinite Lives, The Road to E3 become the epic indie gaming hit I fantasized it would be? To understand what happened, we need to go back in time, all the way back to 2005. Back then, coming off my second year driving halfway across the country to E3 as one of those exhibits-only kids, I figured, hey, more people should be able to experience this. Going to the show was a lifelong dream, something I say every time I cover E3 in a historical context. But now I wanted to share that experience with the world in a documentary. I'd wanted to make movies since I was a kid, and I figured this was my best first chance. I searched, and no such E3 documentary existed out there. I thought, holy crap, this is a golden opportunity. This is something I should really seize on, a blue ocean opportunity. I thought I was being very clever at the time by calling it E3 from the outside in, because it would be from the perspective of gamers out here in flyover country rather than the IGNs or the GameSpots of the world. I recruited my Art Institute friends, including my pal Cody, to help me out, and years before Kickstarter, and without having spent a single dime marketing it anywhere to anyone, we set up a crowdfunding website with the goal of raising $15,000. It was an amount big enough, I thought, that would cover us from pre-production to DVD release. If we didn't raise the full amount within 90 days, we'd refund the money and that'd be that. Well, short story even shorter, we raised a little over $400 and it all went back. We looked into loans and had nothing to offer as collateral, so we were laughed right out of the bank. At that point, I had one last play. I'd put together a pitch video and send it to a company like Penny Arcade and ask them to fund our project. It seemed like it would be right up their alley. This whole thing proved to me, not then, but a long time later, that I had no idea what I was doing. I had never edited a video before. We had no audio or video equipment of our own. We were borrowing cameras and microphones from the Art Institute. I shot 4 hours of video, including interviews, and over the course of several trips between Colorado Springs and Denver, I couldn't get the footage off our DV tapes. This worked out in the end, ironically, because it was all garbage. The audio was awful, we had no lighting, I had no plan, on and on. I saved the world a hassle, to be sure. So that dream was dead. But a year later, I did finally pick up a camera and microphones and editing software, and I started to put together short films with my friends, Kelly and Sam, and a few others. None of these were viral hits or even great for that matter. We didn't win any of the contests we entered, but I learned a hell of a lot. It made sense then that early in 2009, with the equipment we now owned, the skills I'd learned, and the crew, Sam, Cody, Kelly, and myself, could finally pull off our biggest project to date. E3 from the outside in was a go, with a whole new logo. But for reasons I can't remember, I renamed it Infinite Lives The Road to E3, and it had a badass logo too. We planned, we prepared, and that June we set off for Los Angeles, recording the whole way. If I had an idea, Kelly usually knew how to implement it. One requirement of the film was that we needed a time-lapse headed to and coming back from the coast, inspired by Michel Gondry's music video for Lacquer's song, Behind. For that, Kelly rigged up a crossbar and jury-rigged a tripod mount between the two front seats. We had 4 cameras in total, 2 Sony HDR SR1s, which were consumer-level hard drive-based high-definition camcorders, and the other 2 were a pair of pocket-sized Insignia cameras from Best Buy, where I worked at the time. A coworker convinced me to get those over similarly featured but far more expensive flip camcorders because of our employee discount and the expandable storage. But these things were a nightmare. You can tell exactly when we use them because the image quality drops considerably. They had awful sensors. The troubles wouldn't end there, but we'll get back to that. We did E3, had some fun times, and the night before we left, I came down with a nasty cold, which made the trip back hellish. At one point, I forgot to reset the time-lapse camera, so there's a chunk leaving Arizona that we didn't get. We got home pretty much as scheduled, and with tears pouring out of my eyes and snot streaming out of my nose, I did the first talking head interview with Cody before he drove home to Nebraska. He'd come back a few months later to complete the rest of my questions with everyone else on a kind of basement stage of our own design. That's why Cody's the only one in the interviews to have a costume change. I came up with about 100 questions that everyone had to answer on camera. a process that took about 2 hours per person. I then brought all this footage into the film, picking and choosing the best responses as those particular events happened in the film. For reference, I didn't learn about 3 and 4 point editing until years later, which made this a very time-consuming adventure. Leading up to the trip, I envisioned cutting together an 1.5 to 2 hour film would be a relative walk in the park, and it'd be shippable by the end of summer. This coming from a guy who hadn't edited anything together longer than 15 minutes in his life. The biggest trouble came from, you guessed it, those damn Insignia pocket camcorders. Not only did they capture terrible looking footage, whatever codec those videos was using made Sony Vegas go insane, crashing almost every time I opened the affected file. Considering I had to use this footage pretty much immediately in the film, I was freaking out that the whole project was doomed. We shot a lot of the documentary on those cameras, and if we couldn't use it, not only would the documentary suffer, but the only way we could really compensate would be to talking head our way through those gaps, and that would have been awful. The only way around this, ultimately, was to edit the film in 5 to 10 minute chunks and then render it all back together in a master file. Despite shooting the whole film in high definition with HD graphics and interludes, these technical issues scared me away from rendering anything beyond a standard definition master of the film. Also, somehow, I lost a huge chunk of time-lapse coverage from the return trip when we were in New Mexico. I remember loading it on my computer, and when I needed it, it was gone. Poof. I finished a rough cut of the film by the end of September, and it was 1 hour and 45 minutes long with a temp score. Our musician was limping along in his contributions, and it was a huge reason why the film didn't finally get picture and audio locked until the following April, over a full year after we started filming. I managed to shave about 12 minutes off the film and then source a whole bunch of random music from the Newgrounds audio portal. It wasn't ideal, but they signed the releases and I was tired of dealing with that mess by then, and it was good enough, and I was done, and that was all. I cut together a pair of 2-minute trailers that were definitely too long, but they got some coverage on Kotaku. When I finally approved the DVD master with CreateSpace, we gave away a bunch of 2-disc editions, far more than we ever sold. And just like I mentioned at the top of the video, we didn't make it into a single film festival. Whatever. Whatever dreams I had of being able to produce more films with better equipment and dedicated time to do it went right out the window. So what happened? How was this the conclusion of all those years of effort? Well, let's go over some lessons learned from the bad and the good. And we'll go in that order. How's that? First, with how we shot the film, there really wasn't any reason why it needed to be longer than half an hour. I wanted it to be feature length because I wanted a feature under my belt. A problem that came with having as much footage as we shot, about 250 gigabytes of the stuff, is that it was easy to fall in love with all of it. I could associate a memory or a feeling to pretty much anything and present a good reason why I needed to include that particular shot in the film. As they say, you have to kill your darlings. We scheduled things to do while we were in Los Angeles, like interviews with Susan Darnt of The Escapist and Craig Skazimis of Screw Attack, and those worked out pretty well. We also got tickets to see The Tonight Show with the intention of getting an interview with Conan O'Brien, but we couldn't film anything around it since NBC wouldn't give us permission, so it became a talking head moment in the film. It meant that the film spent a lot of time covering mundane stuff, like us eating. A lot of us eating. I also didn't push to get media credentials, which limited the parts of the show we could attend and the areas we could go. The booth interviews, which were the ones that Cody and Sam did that largely didn't make the cut, were organized on the spot, rather than weeks in advance like we should have. We didn't get any exclusive backstage access, we didn't go to any of the press conferences, we didn't get much exclusive gaming content. In a lot of ways, we left money on the table, not going all out. I don't think we even knew how to do any of that stuff back then. Number 2, I wish I'd been more brave. I wish I would have shot more footage. I don't think we ever filled up those Insignia camcorders or came close. It was awkward to carry around our Sony camcorders, but we could have gotten far more show than tell if I'd just had the philosophy that everything needed to be filmed. Especially around the hotel, I wish we would have shot footage at Walmart the day before we left. I wish we would have driven down the Las Vegas Strip rather than past it. Carrying on from my concerns during my research in 2006, I was afraid of legal action if I put in any copywritten material. Music wouldn't have passed muster, but it was surprisingly stupid that I didn't incorporate game footage into the movie, especially as we were talking about our favorite games early on. That whole section could have been redone too. Number 3, I wish I'd learned better tools. Vegas crapped the bed almost every single day I used it, causing extended and probably completely avoidable headaches. It'd be another 5 years before I learned Premiere, and I wish I'd stepped up and learned it then. It wasn't even in my head at the time. All of the animated segments, including the opening and closing titles, were animated in Flash, which was a tool I'd been using for a decade. Unfortunately, Flash video exports wouldn't get decent for another couple years, so in the film they looked chunky and framey and not the best. I wish I'd learned After Effects in 2009 instead of a year later, so they could have come out looking a lot better. Finally, building on the first 2 points about planning to do more stuff and then shooting it, I wish I'd just assembled a better film. In the film's first cut, the climax is about halfway through when we're trying to get down to the Los Angeles Convention Center as quickly as possible to score an interview with one of the G4 TV guys, something Sam had arranged. And naturally, we're trying to rush there in LA traffic, which pumps up the tension even further. In that cut, this climax is set up and resolved as it happened chronologically. Bang, bang, bang. After screening the first cut, I got some secondhand feedback that resolving the climax, building up all that tension, and then quickly relieving it through resolution, left the rest of the film kinda slack and tension-free. Boring, even. So in response to that, I brutally carved it up, putting a chunk up in front as we're on our way to the convention center, and Cody's getting the call from the G4 producer, and tension is building. And then I put the conclusion where we finally get the interview with G4's Blair Herter, spoilers, at the end, with a cheap footage missing cutaway to explain why we didn't resolve the matter as it happened in the film originally. It was cheesy, and it really didn't work. So what did I think I got right? First off, we made the damn thing. We had a great time, and while it was basically a working vacation from our regular lives, it was something I don't think any of us will ever forget. I was in the company of good friends, and I think that translated well in the movie. The road trip is an American tradition, and even without E3, it was still an adventure. Doing the research, gathering the equipment, writing the plan, and making it happen was a big leap forward from the scrappy little films we'd been making before, and the experience was invaluable. Secondly, the film has a badass design system. Before we shot a single frame, I was cranking away on design elements that would make the film stand out. From the introductory sequence to the social media content to the DVD packaging and disc design, the film has a cohesive visual identity. I don't think I've developed a design system that large before or since, and it's one of my favorite portfolio pieces. Third, I learned what creating a good documentary actually requires. Before Infinite Lives, Kelly and I watched a documentary called Startup.com, which is about a company that launched and then failed in the dot-com boom bust after receiving a whole bunch of venture capital. I should say we tried to watch it. The movie was largely formless, just a bunch of footage cut together without context. It was hard to follow the action, and more importantly, it was hard to care about who these people were or what was happening to them. Even though you're making a documentary versus scripted fiction, you can't just turn on a camera and then cut out the boring parts later. A documentary still needs a framing, a beginning, middle, and end. You're still telling a story. So yeah, I wish I'd had more story blocks to work with for Infinite Lives, but in a chicken and egg kind of situation, I know now what kind of footage I would have needed to tell that story better. This carries over to the stuff I make today, like the 30 to 40 minute nth reviews, because I write to the footage and get footage to fulfill the writing, so both aspects are satisfied. Finally, I learned that despite Wikipedia trying to become the sum of all human knowledge, you can't just create a page for your movie just because your movie exists. I went through all of the hoops to make a beautiful page with properly cited sources, and they deleted it because it wasn't notable. Whatever. Submitting the film to Sundance meant we did get IMDb credits though, so that was cool. A few years later, I took the lessons I learned here and made a much shorter 16-minute E3 documentary for Flushing Zipper called Hidden Levels, and I think it fulfilled my vision of what Infinite Lives should have been. Around that same time, with only a handful of DVD sales in the bucket, I uploaded Infinite Lives to YouTube for everyone to watch. Links for both are in the description below. So now it's your turn. Go out and make that documentary you've always dreamt of, and learn from my mistakes. Please. Hey there! I want to thank you for watching this episode of Nth Pop about E3 documentaries. I've talked a lot about E3 lately, and I hope you enjoy it. I want to let you know that the conversation continues on Discord and Twitter and Facebook. So whatever platform you're using, network you're using, we can continue the Nth review there. So with all that said, hey, I'll see you next time.